to the streets to protest a local jail after a young man died there after his arrest. 4029's Brett Rains tells us why the sheriff says he can't say much about what happened. The story new tonight.
It's been more than 2 weeks since 20-year-old Cody Franklin died after being locked up here inside the Franklin County Detention Center. Tonight, his friends say they want answers.
I don't understand why he had to die.
Holding signs that say justice for Cody. Today, friends walked in front of the jail to protest his death.
We're his voice. They took his voice.
During the overnight hours of May 10th, Franklin was arrested for lying to police.
That's a misdemeanor at best. I just don't understand why in a jail that is so overcrowded, they held him on something so small.
The sheriff says after a few hours, jailers found Franklin unresponsive in his cell. He died at the hospital. Now, friends and family members want to know what happened.
He was tased by several officers. That's the rumor. I don't know. We have no answers. No one says anything.
I want the findings to come out more than anybody to show what happened. But we have nothing to hide.
The sheriff says he cannot talk about the case because right now it's under investigation by state police.
When it involves our employees, our jail, I felt it would be best to remove ourselves completely from it. If any of my employees were at fault or it would be dealt with accordingly.
This is happening in our community, in our backyard, and no one knows.
But today is especially tough for family members because
today's his birthday.
Today's his birthday. And I couldn't even imagine how they feel.
The sheriff says it could be weeks until the investigation is complete. We've submitted a Freedom of Information request, and we'll let you know what we find out once the investigation is over. In Ozark, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
No, you will, Brett. Okay, thank you. Tomorrow night, there is a benefit happening for Cody Franklin. This is happening at 801 Garrison in downtown Fort Smith. All the money raised will help go to funeral and legal expenses. Tonight, we have learned that a man accused of being part of a teenage sex ring was beaten after being put behind bars. I'm Kelly Johnson.
And I'm Paige Proisey. Now the sheriff is speaking out to 4029's Brett Rains about what happened. It's new tonight.
The sheriff says last week, 20-year-old Dalton Davis was arrested and then put in jail here at the Franklin County Detention Center. The sheriff says Davis was beaten so badly that he had to be flown to a Fort Smith hospital. The sheriff says that cost nearly $30,000.
It was apparent that he had been, beat up.
The sheriff says Dalton Davis was in a cell with other inmates when a jailer noticed Davis was bleeding from his face.
Usually, if we put a sex offender in with other sex offenders, you usually don't have that problem.
Paramedics were called and Davis was flown to the hospital.
Checked him out there at the hospital, treated him for what injuries he had, and then he was brought back to jail that night.
Davis is one of 5 men accused of being part of a sex ring, preying on teen boys in Mulberry. Right now, according to court records, Davis is in jail, accused of transporting minors for sex and sexual indecency with a child.
We're limited to how we can separate everyone, so it's very tough in a small, overpopulated jail. I don't like paying a $27,000 bill to have one air evac'd out of here.
The sheriff says state police are investigating the beating. The sheriff says regardless of their charges, inmates should not be assaulted behind bars.
Doesn't matter the crime that they've committed, it is our job to protect them, so this doesn't happen to them.
And right now, the sheriff says Davis is in a cell by himself. Now, the beating was caught on camera, but the prosecutor says he's not releasing the video, citing the ongoing investigation. Live in Ozark, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
All right, Brett, thanks so much.
A prosecutor tonight is talking about why he won't file criminal charges against officers after the death of a 20-year-old man at a local jail. Good evening, everyone. I'm Craig Cannon. Cody Franklin died just hours after he was arrested and taken to the Franklin County Jail. 4029's Brett Rains has been following this story. He brings us the latest.
On May 11th, Cody Franklin died in a jail cell at the Franklin County Detention Center. It was ruled a homicide. The prosecutor says a jailer and 2 police officers contributed to his death. But the prosecutor says there was not enough evidence to convince a jury that they did anything wrong.
My concern is simply criminal prosecution.
This is 20-year-old Cody Franklin. He was arrested for obstructing government operations. Once in jail, the prosecutor says Franklin started fighting with inmates. A jailer and police officers tried to separate Franklin, but the prosecutor says he started fighting with them. The prosecutor says Franklin was stunned 8 times during approximately 11 minutes, 5 times before he was in handcuffs and 3 times afterwards.
The death was a result of a perfect storm. There were basically 3 factors. One factor was the methamphetamine intoxication of Cody Franklin himself. Presumably, that was caused by Cody Franklin. The second factor was the exertion and struggle that Cody Franklin engaged in while he was in custody. And then finally, there was the effect of the, for lack of a better phrase, the tasing by the law enforcement officers.
The medical examiner said Franklin died from a buildup of lactic acid and carbon dioxide in his body, all compounded by high levels of meth.
Certainly there was not the intent to kill in this case. The only issue would have been whether it was negligently done or recklessly done.
Brett Rains, 4029 News.
We reached out to family members of Franklin, but we were unable to contact them for a reaction. Well, tonight, 4029 News has obtained exclusive video showing what happened inside a Franklin County jail cell the night an inmate died. Good evening, I'm Craig Cannon.
And I'm Kelly Johnson. Do want to warn you, the video you're about to see may be disturbing to some. Our Brett Rains has been following this story since Cody Franklin died nearly 5 months ago. Tonight, you will only see the story right here on 4029.
On Tuesday night, May 10th, Cody Franklin was brought here to the Franklin County Detention Center. After fighting with inmates and being stunned repeatedly, Franklin died inside a jail cell during the early morning hours, May 11th. Just before 9 o'clock, Cody Franklin was taken to jail after residents called police saying a man was acting strange, hiding in trees and standing in the road. The prosecutor says Franklin's stories to police kept changing. He was arrested for lying to officers.
When he came in, he was very cooperative with everyone. You know, we could tell there was, probably on something, but we didn't think that it would be a concern.
Around midnight, it was not caught on camera, but the prosecutor says Franklin started fighting with other inmates. The jailer called backup. 2 Ozark police officers arrived to help break up the fight. Officers told investigators Franklin was combative when they used a stun gun 5 times in 18 seconds to get him in handcuffs. You can see them pulling Franklin down the hall. As they put him in an isolation cell, you can see Franklin kicking the officers. They kneeled on top of the 20-year-old man as they tried to remove the handcuffs. The prosecutor says Franklin was tased 3 more times.
Their intentions were not to harm anyone. It was to keep everyone safe. And when you get someone that, is on methamphetamine, their strength is, is not that of a normal person.
After checking for a pulse, the officers leave the cell. Approximately 6 minutes later, they return. The officer checks for a pulse, then starts CPR. The jailer calls paramedics. Franklin was taken to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness. After reviewing the case, prosecutor David Gibbons decided not to press criminal charges against the officers.
One factor was the methamphetamine intoxication of Cody Franklin himself. Presumably, that was caused by Cody Franklin. The second factor was the exertion and struggle that Cody Franklin engaged in while he was in custody. Some of that was initiated by Cody Franklin against other inmates in the facility. And then finally, there was the effect of the, for lack of a better phrase, the tasing by the law enforcement officers.
We've tried to contact Cody Franklin's family, but they have not returned our calls. In Ozark, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
Brett, thank you. The prosecutor said he was only reviewing the case to see if any criminal charges would be warranted. That, of course, does not rule out any potential civil lawsuits that Cody Franklin's family could bring against the jail.
New information coming in tonight from the death of the Franklin County inmate. 4029's Brett Rains has been digging into this and reports tonight for the first time that we're hearing what the officers who were there that night told investigators.
3 months ago, I filed a Freedom of Information request to find out what happened inside the Franklin County Detention Center the night Cody Franklin died. Tonight, we're getting our first look at the case file.
He started grabbing my arm and stuff. I told him he needed to back up and not touch me.
That's jailer Nicholas James. After fighting with inmates, the jailer called in Ozark officer Nathan Griffith to help move Cody Franklin to an isolation cell.
He kind of came at me, grabbed hold of me a little bit, pushed him off, and then that's when Officer Griffith grabbed a hold of him.
He kicked me off of him. I backed up, pulled my taser out. When Mr. Franklin seen it, he turned, and I think both my prongs wound up hitting him in the lower back.
He went down, he got straight back up. It looked like he was going to come at us again, so he hit the trigger again.
He wasn't complying with my commands, so I tased him again.
According to the case file, Franklin was tased 5 times while they struggled to handcuff Franklin. When they put him in the isolation cell, you can see Franklin kicking the officers. They called in a third person, Ozark officer Joseph Griffith.
I told Mr. Franklin, if you stop, just relax, quit, or I'm going to tase you. And he continued to do what he was doing, so I drive stunned him. I'm not sure on how many times that I drive stunned him. I think it was 3, but I'm not positive on that.
Then it appeared like he passed out. So we took the cuffs off, we checked his pulse. He had a pulse in his wrist and his neck.
But when officers checked on Franklin about 6 minutes later, he did not have a pulse. They started CPR and called paramedics, but Franklin never regained consciousness. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide, listing the cause of death as meth intoxication, exertion, struggle, restraint, and multiple shocks from the stun gun. Today, I talked to the attorney who's representing Cody Franklin's family. He says right now they're conducting their own investigation. The attorney says they may file a wrongful death lawsuit against the Sheriff's Department. In Ozark, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
Now, prosecutor David Gibbons decided not to file criminal charges against the jailer and the police officers. While the effect of the tasing was a contributing factor in Franklin's death, prosecutor Gibbons says that ultimately Cody Franklin was responsible for his own death by taking the meth and fighting with the inmates and police officers. Tonight, we're taking a closer look at one jail in the area that's been plagued with problems. Good evening, I'm Craig Cannon.
I'm Kelly Johnson. Franklin County leaders say they need a new jail or their current one will be shut down. 4029's Brett Rains reveals new details in a state report that calls for change.
According to this report from the Detention Facilities Review Committee in Little Rock, the Franklin County Jail is not safe for inmates and it's not safe for people who work here. April 30th, inmates started destroying surveillance cameras inside the jail. You can see one inmate beating the camera with his fist until it falls down. The disturbance lasted 2 days until the Ozark Police Special Response Team arrived to help isolate prisoners.
And if it wasn't for the city officers helping us here at the jail when we have something, I mean, there's no way we could run this jail.
But on May 11th, Cody Franklin died inside the jail after the prosecutor said he fought with inmates and police. Franklin was stunned 8 times in 11 minutes. The attorney representing his family is preparing to file a wrongful death lawsuit. In July, Dalton Davis was arrested, accused of sex crimes against teen boys. He was beaten by inmates and had to be flown to the hospital. The sheriff says that cost the county about $30,000.
We are understaffed, and it makes us tough to do our job.
At all times, there are only 2 jailers to watch over inmates. But those jailers are also dispatchers who answer your 911 calls and send police, firefighters, and deputies to your emergencies. The Detention Center Review Committee reports the 42-year-old jail as understaffed, overcrowded, and it's a threat to public safety. The report says the layout of the jail allows inmates to kick, grab, and spit on jailers and visitors.
We've looked at every option.
The man who runs the county says they need a new jail. He says the best option is asking voters to raise the sales tax to pay for it.
We have the interstate out here. There would be some folks that would be helping pay that tax that the citizens wouldn't have to pay. Although a sales tax is hard on our folks that have fixed incomes. The only other option would be to ask for a millage increase on property taxes.
The county judge says voters will decide the issue in March, if not sooner. If voters reject a new jail, The county judge says,
I expect that that they're going to ask the Attorney General to close our jail or make it a 24-hour facility.
if this jail is shut down, the sheriff says his deputies would essentially become transport guards, taking prisoners back and forth to other jails and other counties. The county judge says this county cannot afford that expense. In Ozark, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
Brett, thank you. Design plans and costs for that new jail are expected to be complete by the end of this month. Their deadline to provide a start date for fixing or replacing the jail is coming up April 16th. Now, you can see all of the problems reported there at the Franklin County Jail just by clicking Smarter tonight on our website, 4029tv.com.